My name is Liam Davies, and I'm 32 years old, and I live here in Portland, Oregon, a city that always felt like home, green and misty and full of life, or at least it used to. For years, my life was a comfortable rhythm, a predictable hum of work and friends, and the steady presence of Sarah, my girlfriend of almost 3 years, and Mark, my best friend for over a decade. We were always together, a tight-knit trio in the same circle, our hangouts and routines intertwined like a well-worn tapestry. I was the anchor, the one everyone counted on, the stable one who remembered birthdays and helped people move apartments and covered shifts when someone was short. Sarah used to joke that I was too reliable, a cute flaw she'd say with a smile, and Mark leaned on me just as much, always coming to me for advice, connections, or favors. I never thought twice about it, truly, it was just how things always were, a comfortable weight I carried without complaint. But then things at work started to get stressful, the kind of demanding project that eats into your nights and weekends, leaving you hollowed out and drained. I was more tired, less fun, more quiet. That's when I noticed a subtle shift in Sarah and Mark, a closeness that had been there but now felt amplified. Late nights, inside jokes I wasn't part of, little looks exchanged between them that I tried to ignore because I trusted them both completely and without question. My trust was a fortress, you see, built on years of shared history and affection, and I believed it was impenetrable. The breach came in the most mundane, almost comically boring way. My phone was dead, its screen dark and unresponsive, and I needed to order some takeout. Sarah's laptop was on the kitchen counter, open, and I just grabbed it, navigating to the food delivery app. That's when it happened. A message from Mark popped up on the screen, a new notification. It wasn't graphic, not in the way you might expect, but the familiarity of it, the casual intimacy in his words, struck me like a cold wave. My stomach clenched, a sudden, sharp twist that pulled me away from the takeout menu. I told myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, just a playful message between friends, but my gut wouldn't let it go, a strange, persistent whisper of wrongness. My fingers, almost against my will, scrolled back through their conversation history, and that's when the world tilted on its axis, unraveling into a horrifying clarity. Months of sneaking around, of whispered plans, of jokes about how I never notice anything, plans specifically made around my schedule, around my blind spots. That part, the casual deception, the comfortable treachery, it messed me up more than the cheating itself. It wasn't a moment of weakness, an impulsive mistake. It was a carefully constructed lie built on my own reliability. I didn't confront them, not then, not ever. I just sat there, the glowing screen illuminating my face in the dim kitchen, a deep, icy emptiness spreading through me. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning in the bed next to Sarah, her breathing even and soft, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my head. But through the storm, something else began to settle, an unnerving calm, as if something snapped into place, not broken, but utterly rearranged. It was a clarity that felt almost alien, a detached realization of how much emotional labor I'd been doing for both of them, smoothing things over, protecting their images, their vulnerabilities, without even realizing the extent of it. It was like I had been a constant source of unseen energy, an invisible buffer keeping their world, and by extension, their true natures, stable and pleasant. And then, as the first gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains, a new chilling thought solidified in my mind. What would happen if I just stopped? Not with a bang, not with a confrontation, but with a quiet, deliberate withdrawal, and so I stopped. That was it, truly. I didn't announce anything, didn't blow up group chats with furious accusations, didn't post screenshots of their sickening messages. I simply stopped being useful. It wasn't an act of revenge, not in the fiery way you see in movies, but something far more insidious, more primal. It was like pulling a plug from a hidden outlet, severing an unseen connection that only I had maintained. The world around me didn't immediately shatter, but it began to subtly shift, like a building whose foundations were suddenly left unsupported. The first few days, nothing seemed outwardly different, but the feeling in our apartment, the one Sarah and I shared, began to change. It wasn't just my perception. The air itself seemed heavier, colder, even when the sun was streaming through the windows, casting strange, elongated shadows that I swore moved on their own. When Sarah was late, I didn't make excuses for her anymore, not to myself, not to our mutual friends who would inevitably ask. I just offered a noncommittal shrug. When Mark skipped plans we'd made, I didn't joke it away, didn't text him asking if he was okay, didn't offer a ready explanation to others. I just let the silence hang, let the absence speak for itself. That's when the other things started. Small at first, almost imperceptible. I'd be alone in the apartment and I'd hear faint whispers just at the edge of hearing, like dry leaves skittering across a concrete path, but with a distinctly human cadence. I couldn't make out words, but the sound itself was unsettling, a constant undercurrent to the silence. Sometimes I'd be in the living room reading and I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, just beyond the edge of the couch, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, only to vanish when I turned my head directly to look. My mind tried to rationalize it, to blame it on fatigue or stress, but the rationalizations felt thin, transparent. Sarah herself began to seem off. When I looked at her, truly looked at her, it was like a filter had been removed from my perception. Her bright eyes, which I once found so captivating, now seemed to hold a desperate, almost hungry glint. She complained about feeling tired, about aches and pains, but there was a new, unsettling quality to her skin, a subtle dullness, a faint grayness around her mouth, as if a vital spark had begun to dim. When she spoke, her voice sometimes had a faint rasp I hadn't noticed before, like she was straining to maintain a pleasant tone. And Mark, my best friend, began to exhibit a similar kind of unraveling. He seemed more disheveled, his usual charm replaced by nervous energy that bordered on frantic. His eyes, when they met mine, held a strange, almost pleading look, like a cornered animal, but tinged with something colder, something predatory. I started finding objects out of place, not just trivial things like keys or remotes, but significant ones. A worn photo of the three of us from an old hiking trip, usually on my bedside table, would appear face down on the kitchen counter. Or a small, oddly shaped stone I'd kept as a souvenir from a trip we all took together, usually in my desk drawer, would be sitting conspicuously on my pillow. Felt like a deliberate disturbance, a message I couldn't decipher, delivered by unseen hands. The whispers intensified, sometimes sounding distinctly like Sarah's voice, sometimes Mark's, but twisted, stretched, and layered with an unnatural echo, as if speaking from a very deep, very dark place. They weren't just sounds, they were presences. I felt them, a cold dread clinging to my skin, a sense of being perpetually observed by something that thrived in the shadows I was now creating by my withdrawal. My silent refusal to engage, to provide the emotional cushioning I always had, was having a more profound effect than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just their social standing that was unraveling, it was them. I began to see the facade peel away, not just in their interactions with others, but in their very being. Sarah's bright laughter became brittle, her smile strained, her eyes darting nervously. Mark's confident swagger became a desperate flail, his conversations peppered with inconsistencies, his gaze unfocused. The apartment became a living nightmare for me. The air grew heavier, colder, the shadows deeper, almost viscous. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to the distinct smell of something foul, like damp earth and decay, clinging to the fabric of the curtains, seeping from the walls. I tried to air out the place, to clean every surface, but the smell persisted, a phantom stench that followed me from room to room. I would see faint, fleeting reflections in the windows at night, distorted figures moving just outside the glass, sometimes resembling Sarah, sometimes Mark, but warped, elongated, like caricatures of their former selves. My heart would pound in my chest, a desperate drumbeat against my ribs, and I'd scramble for the light switch, only to find the windows showing nothing but my own terrified reflection. I started to avoid the apartment as much as I could, spending longer hours at work, taking walks through Forest Park even in the pouring rain, just to escape the oppressive atmosphere. But the feeling of being watched, of being subtly stalked, followed me. I'd be walking down a bustling street in downtown Portland, surrounded by people, and a chill would run down my spine, a cold sensation that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I'd glance over my shoulder, convinced I'd see one of them, or something even worse, lurking just behind a lamppost or disappearing into a doorway, but there was never anything, just the ordinary, bustling city. My sanity began to feel like a fragile thread stretched taut, threatening to snap. Was I just imagining things? Was the betrayal, the stress, causing me to hallucinate? The thought terrified me even more than the strange occurrences themselves. One evening, I returned to the apartment after a particularly long day, the persistent drizzle of Portland rain mirroring the desolation I felt inside. As I pushed open the front door, a wave of frigid air hit me, even colder than usual. The apartment was silent, completely still, but it vibrated with an unseen energy, a palpable dread. The faint whispers were louder now, no longer just a rustling but distinct layered voices just on the cusp of intelligibility. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me, pressing in. I moved through the living room, my breath catching in my throat. On the coffee table, carefully arranged, were several items. A dried, brittle rose, one I'd given Sarah on our first date, now crumbled and gray. A broken watch, the one I'd given Mark for his 30th birthday, its face cracked and hands frozen at an impossible hour. And a small, framed photo of the three of us, taken years ago, smiling, vibrant. But the photo itself was warped, the faces of Sarah and Mark stretched, their smiles too wide, their eyes too dark, like monstrous parodies of joy. A sudden, sharp movement caught my eye. In the corner of the room, near the large window that overlooked our small balcony, a figure coalesced from the deepening shadows. It wasn't fully formed, not solid, but it was unmistakably Sarah, or at least a horrifying echo of her. Her form was translucent, shimmering like heat haze, her outlines indistinct, but her shape was there, her long hair, the curve of her arm. She swayed slightly, her face turned towards me, and her eyes, though lacking pupils or irises, radiated a bottomless hunger, a chilling emptiness that went beyond human. And then she spoke, her voice a chorus of those dry, whispering sounds, but now coalescing into words, clear and distinct and utterly devoid of human warmth. You starved us, the words echoed in the cold, silent room, sinking into my bones. You starved us. Not you hurt us, not you betrayed us, but you starved us. It hit me then, a horrifying realization, a truth that ripped through the last vestiges of my rational mind. My reliability, my emotional labor, my constant support, it wasn't just a benefit to them, it was their sustenance. I wasn't just their friend and lover, I was their unwitting feeder, providing the energy, the stability, the very essence they needed to maintain their human forms, their pleasant facades. Without my steady presence, without that constant, subtle flow of life force I unknowingly poured into them, they were decaying, regressing to something primal and monstrous. And I, in my attempt to simply step back and let their social lies unravel, had inadvertently pulled the plug on their very existence as recognizable human beings. The lowest point wasn't just the betrayal. It was the chilling understanding that I, in my quiet act of self-preservation, had unleashed something truly horrific, something that was now haunting my home, staring at me with those vacant, hungry eyes. My act of silent justice had become an act of accidental, monstrous creation. The translucent form of Sarah began to ripple, her face distorting, stretching like rubber pulled too thin. Her whispers grew louder, more frantic, joined by another, deeper, guttural hum that I recognized as Mark's, a sickening resonance filling the room. "We needed you," the voices hissed, overlapping, weaving into a chorus of accusation and something far more terrifying, desperate need. The air grew impossibly cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your marrow and freezes your very thoughts. I could feel the energy being drained from the room, from me, as if the very act of their spectral presence was a siphon. I knew then that I couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear and this grotesque revelation. My choice to withdraw hadn't been an escape, it had been an initiation into a nightmare. I had to understand what I was dealing with, what they truly were, and how to stop this horrifying decay from consuming everything, including me. My eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for an answer, a clue, anything that could explain this monstrous reality. My gaze fell upon a small, dusty box tucked away on a shelf in the built-in bookcase, a box I hadn't touched in years. It contained old mementos from Sarah and Mark, things they had given me, silly trinkets, forgotten letters. It was a long shot, but a desperate one. As I reached for it, the spectral forms of Sarah and Mark seemed to surge forward, their whispers now a cacophony of distorted pleas and guttural snarls. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and I felt a sharp, burning sensation on my skin, as if tiny, invisible teeth were trying to latch onto me. My fingers trembled as I pulled the box down, the flimsy cardboard almost disintegrating in my grasp. Inside, beneath a jumble of concert tickets and faded photographs, I found it, an old leather-bound journal. It wasn't mine, nor was it Sarah's. It was Mark's, a relic from his teenage years that I barely remembered him mentioning. Its pages were filled with his cramped handwriting, detailing not just the usual teenage angst, but increasingly strange observations. He wrote about feelings of emptiness, about a constant gnawing hunger that nothing could satisfy. He described how he felt replenished when around certain people, how he could feed off their energy, their goodwill, their kindness. The entries grew darker, more obsessive, detailing how he and Sarah, who he eventually brought into his strange world, had developed a symbiotic relationship, unconsciously seeking out and latching onto stable, reliable individuals. He specifically mentioned me, Liam, noting my boundless well of patience and selfless energy. The horror of it twisted my stomach. It wasn't a metaphor, they weren't just emotionally parasitic. They were literally drawing something from me, something vital, something that had kept them tethered to their humanity. My reliability wasn't just a trait, it was a life source. And by withdrawing it, I hadn't simply caused them social ruin, I had starved them, peeled away their human skin to reveal the monstrous, empty core beneath. As I read, the apparitions around me intensified. Sarah's translucent form writhed, her hands reaching out, elongated and skeletal, stretching towards me with an impossible hunger. Mark's form appeared beside her, his face a distorted mask of rage and terror, his whispers becoming a roar that echoed through the small apartment, shaking the very walls. "You can't escape us, you made us." A sickening realization dawned on me. This wasn't just about them. By severing that connection, I had left a gaping void. The energy, the sustenance they had drawn from me, now had nowhere to go, or perhaps it was being drawn back, but twisted and corrupted, forming these grotesque specters, these desperate, hungry echoes of what they once were. I wasn't just witnessing their decay, I was caught in the feedback loop of it, the very act of my independence creating the monsters that now haunted me. I knew I couldn't fight them in this form. I couldn't reason with these empty husks. I had to sever the connection, not just socially, but fundamentally. I had to break the invisible ties that still bound me to them, that allowed them to draw from me, even in their decayed state. The journal, it contained the proof, the record of their parasitic nature. If their existence was so intertwined with feeding, then perhaps the very act of documenting it, of exposing it, was the key. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, I slammed the journal shut. The spectral figures recoiled slightly, as if struck by an unseen force. Their shrieks intensified, a cacophony of pain and fury. I knew instinctively that I had to get this journal, this proof, this terrible truth out of this apartment, out of this corrupted space. I had to destroy the physical link to their power, to their feeding. Clutching the journal, I bolted for the front door, the apparitions swirling around me, their icy touch grazing my skin, sending jolts of pure terror through my body. The apartment seemed to fight back, objects rattling on shelves, shadows leaping and twisting, trying to obscure my path. I stumbled, caught myself, and burst out into the cool, damp Portland night. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I ran through the quiet streets, the journal clutched tightly in my hand, the whispers still echoing in my ears, though fainter now, as if struggling to follow me. I found myself at the edge of Forest Park, the dense trees looming like ancient sentinels, their branches dripping with recent rain. My mind raced. Destroy the connection, destroy the proof, the journal. This was the physical manifestation of their parasitic intent. I fumbled for my lighter, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. With a click and a small flame, I ignited the corner of the leather-bound book. The old paper caught quickly, curling into black ash, the flames licking hungrily at Mark's cramped confessions. As the journal burned, a strange sensation washed over me. It was like a heavy, invisible chain was being severed, link by agonizing link. The whispers in my ears faded further, replaced by a final, prolonged, horrifying shriek that seemed to rip through the very fabric of the night, coming from the direction of my apartment. Then silence. Utter, complete, terrifying silence. I stood there watching the last embers die down, leaving nothing but a pile of warm ash that quickly cooled in the rain. The air around me felt lighter, cleaner, though my body still thrummed with residual fear. The specters were gone. The whispers were gone. Sarah and Mark, or whatever they had truly been, were finally, completely gone. I never went back to that apartment. I broke the lease, packed what few belongings I absolutely needed, and found a new place on the other side of the city. I tried to rebuild my life, to forget the horrors I had witnessed. The lingering twist, the terrifying secret, is that I now see it everywhere. I see the subtle dependencies in relationships, the way some people unconsciously draw from others, not always with malevolent intent, but with an insatiable hunger nonetheless. I watch my new friends, my colleagues, even strangers on the street, and I see the glint in their eyes, the subtle shift in their posture, the almost imperceptible ways they lean on others. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, when the silence stretches too long, I feel a faint, phantom cold spot on my skin, a whisper that seems to brush against my ear, just barely there, like a distant memory. I wonder if I truly destroyed the parasitic entities or if I simply cut them off from their previous hosts, leaving them to seek new wells of kindness, new sources of unsuspecting reliability. I wonder if the act of knowing, of seeing what lies beneath the surface of human connection, has forever changed me, making me a magnet for such things. I am Liam Davies, and I am 32, and I live in Portland, Oregon, but I am no longer the reliable man I once was. I am the man who knows the true cost of kindness and the terrifying hunger that lurks just beneath the surface of everyday life, a hunger that now, I suspect, knows me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wonder if the silence I finally achieved by stepping back, by letting the truth be visible, wasn't a fair thing for myself at all, but rather the opening of a door to a horror that will never truly close.